would be unless it forces.
And just so you know, this meeting is being recorded. Very happy to have you all here today. Hope you all are staying cool. Tuan, can you move to the introduction slide? So yeah, as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and if you could please drop your name and organization in the chat, that would be super helpful for us to track attendance and conduct our attendance analysis after the meetings. Thanks for that. And next slide, please. So just to give an overview of this committee and our membership before we really get into it, we're really comprised here of charging infrastructure, OEMs, fleets, utilities, government agencies, and ports. We have about 21 charging infrastructure organizations, 18 OEMs, 10 fleets, 4 government agencies, 10 utilities, 4 ports. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us on these meetings. It's very helpful in directing and guiding this project. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll be doing our typical ITAC and ITAC overview and highlights. Then we'll move on to a segment on our Advanced Transportation Research Center and have a bit of discussion there.
Hey, Rob.
And then we'll move on to a pilot sites overview updates. Next will be BEV truck charging use case considerations for cost benefit analysis presentation along with the discussion. And then next will be a BEV truck high power charging equipment research gaps presentation, followed by NACS updates short segment. And then lastly, we'll move on to next steps and we'll adjourn the meeting. And with that, I'll pass it over to Watson.
Yeah, it's great. Nice to see everybody today. My name is Watson Collins, a senior technical executive with EPRI and co-PI on the e-truck project with Jasna Tomic from CalSTART. And so we really appreciate everybody joining today. We're going to just start out with just a couple slides in the beginning, just to get everybody, calibrated, remind everybody what the purpose of the e-truck project is and give you a sense for where the project stands. And then we're going to move on to a few discussions where we're kind of looking for more feedback and insights from you and guidance. And again, that is a big purpose of the ITAC is that role. So the project overview of the e-truck project, it's funded by the California Energy Commission. It's a research hub to accelerate electrification of heavy duty vehicles. And so we have these 4 big project goals and objectives around equity and workforce development. And so there's community engagement activities that we have underway. There's a market needs and technology assessment. And so many of you have participated in some of our interviews in this area. And we appreciate the feedback provided to us through that process. And that's really helping us create a pathway forward for the project. And the third big area is research and development around R&D activities for high power megawatt level charging technologies. And we're deploying and demonstrating some of these technologies. So one of the technical levels of targeted levels of performance out of this project was 100 miles of range in 10 minutes. And so when you do the math on that, that puts you in megawatt power levels of charging. And then it gets all brought together in something that's around a public corridor charging strategies. And where we're going to develop based on travel data analysis and information gained along the way to develop a corridor strategies for California for the heavy duty vehicle market. So I'll move on to the next slide to the ITAC goals and what's the purpose of this group. And so again, like I said, really appreciate everybody taking the time to participate. You know, the point is we want to hear a lot of voices. We want to get the perspectives. It helps make the work that's funded by the CEC even better. So so that's the ITAC's purpose is to help, you know, inform the statewide plan. So the objectives here is like we're going to talk through some of the technology tasks. And we're going to talk through some of the demonstration work we're doing and the lab work. And we really do kind of want feedback on a lot of these things along the way. And we may even be discussing whether there's a purpose of having smaller work groups or how we can have smaller sessions with folks that have specific interest in some of these targeted areas. So that we can have a really rich discussion and deep discussion in some of those areas. But again, it reminds you that there's multiple aspects to this project, from this fleet needs and technology maturity assessment, this technology development and corridor planning. And so today's focus will be a lot on the technology maturity assessment kind of work and some of our technology development there. So on the next slide, I'll give you just an update on some things that are out there, the accomplishments and highlights. There's an etruck.org website. I encourage you to check that out. There's some information on all these committee meetings, recordings of presentations from that. Please avail yourselves of that. We hope to create more resources there as more information comes forward. We have multiple advisory committees and they're all active right now. There's a technical advisory committee. There's a ITAC, which is this industry technology advisory committee. We also have a community first technology advisory committee and a workforce development advisory committee. Those are all active. Again, you know, type in chat if you want to be involved in any of those other committees. Just let us know. You know, and if you want to get connected with, for example, the community one or the workforce development one, your participation would be welcome. We have a lot of work going on the pilot sites and so that's progressing. There's work on what we're now calling more clearly the Advanced Transportation Research Center, which includes a high-power charging lab at the Southern Cal Edison's Pomona facility. We have test equipment arriving in August, and so that's pretty exciting that we're going to have a lot more resources and facilities coming up in August. And we'll talk a little bit more about that lab as part of today's discussion. And then we've done a lot of work on the truck maturity assessments and interviews. And so they're really exciting. We're going to be publishing some papers, but we have some additional discussions today as part of today's agenda to help provide deeper insights there. So again, encourage folks, you know, to type in chat while we're going through these areas. Raise your hand. You know, when we go through some of these areas that Ken Lim and Mark Wiseman are going to go through next. I really encourage you to engage with them and you know, add to the discussion. So I'll pass it over to Ken for for the next discussion of the Advanced Transportation Research Center. And again, thanks to Southern Cal Edison and Jordan Smith, who's kind of the point person with SCE on our collaboration with them on this work here. So, Ken, go ahead and take yourself off mute and introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Watson. Hey, everyone, I'm Ken Lim. I'm a technical leader for the transportation team here at EPRI, primarily working on the ITAC project, focusing on the Advanced Transportation Research Center and the demonstration sites. I get the next slide, please. So part of ETRUC's goals is to establish a Advanced Transportation Research Center. Right now, we are working with SCE to incorporate a part of that research center within their high-power charging lab in Pomona, as Watson mentioned. So some quick timelines there, where equipment, as Watson mentioned, is arriving in August. The plan is to have the lab stood up in October of this year. Put a quick blurb in there for the high level for the equipment that EPRI has purchased for the lab, comprising of DC emulators, an AC emulator, and a Keysight charging discovery system, the high power variety. So with the equipment, there is quite a variety of testing that can be done. Listed a few examples there: interoperability, conformance, functional testing, comms testing, analysis of charging interruptions, durability, burn-in test, end-of-line test. And the goal of this call is to, one, introduce the lab to the ITAC members, but also make it more interactive to kind of understand the biggest needs in the industry from a testing perspective. Before we get to that, just a quick blurb on how to access the lab. The etruck.org website has a outlined step-by-step process, starting off with an intake application. The idea is the user would put together this application, outline the unit they will be testing, the test purpose, and a test plan. And then the ETRUC team will review applications, do formal onboarding into the facility, and coordinate scheduling as well. And then the user is responsible for safe installation and removal and testing under the supervision of the SCE team at the facility. I'll just pause there to see if there's any questions in chat or anybody wants to come off mute. If not, we can go ahead on to the next slide. All right. So, as Watson mentioned with eTruck, the overall goal is really to advance megawatt level charging technology. With this lab, the idea is we have overall goals to advance megawatt. Sorry for the background noise there. So we have overall goals to advance megawatt level charging, but we also want to be sure to address the needs of the industry from a testing standpoint. So the second blurb there is the objectives of the facility. And from a high level, it really is about addressing some of the issues we have right now in the industry with interoperability, optimizing charging infrastructure deployment, and understanding, early market transformation, making sure that the industry as a whole has a positive experience. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that there's a seamless charging experience for the end user. So with these goals in mind, we had a few questions for the ITAC members, first and foremost. So now that we have all the equipment picked out, the lab is being built, we want to make sure that we address all the needs that the industry has for this type of test facility. So the first question I wanted to pose to this team is, what factors would encourage your team to use this type of facility? It can be cost, convenience of access, the test gear available, vehicle availability for interoperability testing, perhaps like a test list from the Keysight team. So I'm really hoping to get some feedback here from this team. So please feel free to come off mute and or also pose some questions in the chat.
Yeah, hey, Ken, this is Watson. And again, for folks on the call, the California Energy Commission, EPRI, Southern Cal Edison, there's a lot of effort here to put together this lab, a lot of resources. Like as Ken said, we're trying to make this something that helps the market transformation. It's I don't want to call it a safe place, but it's the appropriate environment to work out things before deployments, and so that's what we're really trying to provide is that environment there that for that to happen. But we want to make sure that as we're putting together implementation plans here, that it works for folks in industry. So again, if you've got concerns about this lab or how you would use it, or are you concerned about privacy of the things that you do, please chime in, and that would really help us understand what the things we need to work on so that it works for folks in industry.
Matt, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Nathan and Watson, for the presentation. I guess my initial thought here is have you guys reached out to the actual fleets who are part of the technical advice ITAC? Because as I went through the list of who you had listed on the first slide, I don't see any of those fleets on this particular call. I'm not sure. I mean, we're happy to reach out to our member companies who are listed on there to get some feedback from them. Obviously, a couple of them are engaged in the JETSI project and some other ongoing things. I know some of the TAS folks like Forum Mobility, who's on today, works directly with a few fleets and some of the ports, but you're trying to ask for feedback from fleets where there are no fleets. And I see people from CalSTART, I see folks from the CEC, I see folks from charging providers. There's a couple folks from an OEM. So I'm wondering, maybe this isn't the right platform or medium to get feedback for these particular things, because if it's fleet dependent, I mean, I can tell you that, of course, I think that your initial assumptions there of cost and convenience to access, availability, are going to be high up on the list, especially, how much availability is going to be available to fleets who would want to utilize this. Do you have fleets that you've spoken to? Do you have some folks who are engaged in the pilot project, or are we just going through the motions here?
So to answer thanks for asking, Matt, and to answer your question there, we have reached out to fleets as part of the e-truck project and the freight transport industry surveys. This lab in particular is really geared towards testing charging equipment. So the ultimate users for this lab that we're hoping for would be the EVSE manufacturers that are developing charging hardware, whether it's the megawatt MCS connector related equipment, or the folks developing even the CCS hardware that would need a test facility to do some testing on their equipment prior to deploying out in the field. So whether it's a, you know, charging manufacturer, charger manufacturer, or a truck OEM manufacturer, it really is a place to do some behind the fence testing on products before they get deployed.
Okay.
That's the ultimate goal.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that clarification, Ken. Either way, I think that, you know, I guess then it would be, the impetus would be on them to have test vehicles that they could be able to put into the lab, I imagine, to, you know, ease of accessibility, et cetera. So, all right, well, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, just a follow-up question on that, on your comments there. Do you think that the fleets themselves have any need to see stuff before they buy it, or you know what I mean? Which is kind of, I think, where you were heading with the you know what I mean?
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you're-
definitely. In general, absolutely. You know, you want to kick the tires or whatever, right? So, I mean, I think that that's a safe assumption in that regard.
Okay.
But as Don had thrown in the chat there, it's difficult to have feedback right now since there is no deployment of this level of charging at this point in time. We're a couple of years, or I'm not exactly sure how far out we are at this time. But yes, absolutely. I think that if this lab has that capability for fleets to be able to deploy equipment, and again, it would be, I imagine, in some level of beta testing to get to that level of charging output. But short answer would be yes, Watson.
Like around the testing we intend to do, one of the things a lot of us, you know, experience with the light duty charging infrastructure is, you know, people would buy chargers from hardware company A, and they would learn that you know, it worked with a lot of vehicles, but it didn't work with vehicles from company Z, you know what I mean? And so there wasn't always this interoperability thing. And then people were trying to figure out, you know, like, who needs to fix their side when that happens. And so this thing is, while it is aimed at the high power charging, as Ken said, we'll be able to do just regular charging with the CCS kind of hardware starting in October. So if there is, you know, charging hardware or vehicles that folks want to make sure that it gets worked out, you know, this lab is available there.
I don't know, Mark, how much on your side you can help out the SPA type of things, and for right now, maybe I think about that's more legal, or maybe we can start.
I'm just gonna mute that. I don't think that was for us.
I was wondering if we're getting SBA involved. That'd be interesting. Well, that's good to know, Watson. I think that, you know, I mean, it's just a function of whether or not the charging pedestal manufacturers or whomever to have the ability to give some place for their potential fleets. I mean, you have obviously what Daimler's doing, you have what Volvo's doing on the OEM side. I think that it's a good opportunity. Again, I think that, you know, kicking the tires, because interoperability is critical for us. You know, we're not like, you know, the heavy duty trucking industry, especially in drayage, is far from what the passenger vehicle light duty side is. Without interoperability, this will never work. So it's encouraging. Maybe there's an opportunity to continue to push on some of the manufacturers, charging pedestal manufacturers, to get into this test lab, to be able to send potential customers. I know that South Coast is looking at doing a truck loaner program for zero emissions. You have other creative things that are going out there from some of the rental and leasing companies who are doing short-term rentals for zero emission trucks. These are all opportunities for fleets to go rent a truck and go try to utilize potentially some different types of charging software. It could be, you know, the charging rodeo or whatever Since we are off from that MCS standard, maybe in the interim, that's what this should be more focused on.
I see some comments from Jordan in the chat there. Jordan, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I think I was just reinforcing your point, Watson and Ken, that the capabilities of the lab and the importance of the capabilities to fleet operators and others to ensure that reliable, safe, cyber secure equipment is deployed, and supporting your point also on trying to get a handle on that prior to deployment can help accelerate transportation electrification, avoid costly problems that might result in sort of obstruction to fleet operations. So all these types of things were envisioned in eTruck as being important to advance fleet electrification.
Great.
Yeah, that's a good follow-up point. Thank you, Jordan. Yes, I mean, the way I see it, thinking out loud, is the benefits here are for the fleet operators. Make sure that they have a seamless experience as early adopters with heavy-duty charging. The main audience, I think, for this part of the presentation and the lab is geared towards the EVSE manufacturers and the truck OEM. So perhaps this is maybe something that would need a specific subcommittee, as we were mentioning earlier, Watson, to kind of gear those questions towards a more focused group to better understand what the needs are from the industry for this facility. Looks like Dan has a question in the chat. I think that more testing facilities available would be good for all, but interoperability.
Right, and that's what I thought it would do as well. Just compile and also proofread to make sure it flows.
Interoperability testing issue is ongoing work for both OEMs, EVSE, and CPMS providers. Yeah, so it sounds like interoperability has been brought up, multiple times. So it seems like that is definitely a priority to ensure interoperability. I would say, in terms of for this presentation, I would think the next two questions are a little bit more pointed and technical. It goes down to the type of testing and what are the test capabilities the industry needs right now. I would say we sort of answered that high level. But again, I think this may be something that's better suited for a more focused group for the charging manufacturers and testing teams as well. Watson, do you have any additional comments there, or are we good with moving on to deployment?
Yeah, so if we did have what our plan is for the lab is please type in the chat if or contact Ken and Jordan around your interest in just having a little bit more discussions over your thoughts around getting this lab directed in a way that the industry needs, and so please follow up with them. Type in chat if you wanted to do that. But we may also be reaching out to some of you just to have some one-on-one discussions, just to make sure that we get this aligned with what the industry needs, and make sure that this resource that's out there, it's great. But we're spending, there's millions of dollars going into this, and so we want to make sure that it's useful there too. So. So we may, be following up with some of you also outside of the call, if you don't mind, but appreciate that. Great. I think, Ken, you've got the next slide on the demonstration sites too, right?
Yep, if we can go to the next slide. a quick update with the demonstration site. So we have 2 locations. One is MHX, which is primarily a drayage application, about 10 miles from the Port of Los Angeles. Second side is the travel center's location off the I-10 interstate. So both of these projects are currently in engineering right now. The plan for the MHX location is to install 4 CCS chargers rated at 350 kilowatts. The initial, hypothesis to install megawatt charging for this location, or that was the initial hypothesis, and over time we realized that with the operations of that facility and the use cases necessary, 4 CCS charges were sufficient to meet the needs of the MHS location. So like I mentioned, that one is currently in engineering. It's going to have 4 CCS chargers, battery energy storage system to offset, peak times based on the utility rate during on-peak hours. And then for the Travel Centers of America, the idea there is to ultimately have a early production version of a MCS unit at that site as an interim solution until the MCS connector and MCS technology is firmed out. The interim plan right now is to install a CCS charger at that location and then do a future swap out when the MCS unit is available. So like I mentioned, both of those are currently in engineering right now. Adam Browning, what is quasi-public? That's a great question. So the idea is for MHX is they have their own fleet of electric trucks, and they also have on-call, an option for on-call vehicles as well. So the idea is that these chargers will serve their fleet as well as some on-call vehicles, but it will be based on a schedule and it'll be access controlled. So it's not completely public, and it's not a private charging hub as well. It's quasi-public is what we're calling it.
Got it. I'm just curious about like that, the ability to reserve, how you're managing that type of access.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, the idea is implementing a reservation system with access control to the facility.
And would that be the same for the travel center one, which is public
That one will
charging?
be-
Would you be able to reserve, or do you
that one will
just
be
show up and wait?
At this time, that one is, I don't think it's been hashed out yet, whether it's going to have a reservation system or if you can just show up and wait. I think ultimately it depends on demand specifically for that one MCS unit. But it is public to any vehicle that needs a charge.
Okay.
So Adam, the interesting learning out of the MHX location around these charging locations. These chargers are actually located where they load and unload the goods off the trucks. And so they're trying to charge while they're doing that, as opposed to going to a place to charge and stopping work or stopping their travel. They're trying to do this while the truck is, being loaded and unloaded, so that it doesn't create. They're trying to minimize. MHX is trying to minimize the amount of time that the trucks are unavailable to do their job, to move goods. So that's kind of an interesting, lesson for us while we went through this, is that, the placement of those chargers weren't in like, we'll build a yard where trucks can pull into charge and, wait in line, like you said, and wait while they charge. It's to actually bring the chargers to where the trucks need it, as opposed to bring the trucks to where the chargers are.
Got it. So it is at the loading dock. So
Hey, well-
essentially, you have to be in active loading or unloading to be charging. And conversely, if you're not doing that, then you're blocking a dock if you're trying to charge and
Yeah, it's not a dock, but it's a big yard where they're lifting things off with yard hostlers and stuff like that. So
It's-
where they're
yeah,
lifting the
It's
freight
their
off.
warehouse. I was just going to add, and I think that's part of the quasi-public nature is having to work around the MHX schedule for when non-MHX vehicles will be available to use the chargers as well.
So not all the trucks that go into that yard are MHX owned. These will call drivers. You know, they may be picking up freight to go to somebody else's warehouse and so there's a number of these independent drivers that do go into the MHX yard. It's just not you know, it's not just somebody driving down the street and say, oh, there's a charger there. It's the people that have a purpose to be there, because there's a lot of active things going on in a freight yard, right?
yeah. I mean, you know, I'll be very interested to see how this all works out and appreciate the experimentation and
Yeah.
particularly around just, you know, the use cases, as you know, like goods movement depends upon schedulability and certainty, like just not knowing when, where you can charge. It doesn't have the same impact as on, say, a light duty passenger vehicle. Like this is, so I'm be very interested to see how the non-MHX trucks may make effective use of that.
Yeah, we'll keep you updated as we learn more and develop more at the site. All right, I think that's it for the demonstration site. I'll pass it on to Mark Wiseman. Want to move on? Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Ken. So we're changing gears a little bit here from the hardware side to more the tasks that we're doing that's looking at the, you know, how is all the megawatt scale charging going to roll out? What's its maturity? Where do we need to do work and preparations to really get ready and enable the megawatt charging across the trucking sector? There's two bits going to talk about this morning. First one is around cost benefit analysis. So as part of the work, we want to have a look at what is the cost benefit of megawatt charging. Obviously, some fleet operations are going to be very price sensitive. Others are very time sensitive. And how do we compare, you know, those benefits to the fleets against what the incremental costs are going to be? The idea here is for it to inform us where we may have to do some research work. Where do we think the best adoptions could be for the vehicles? What do we think this really means in terms of the cost side? And to do this, what we wanted to do was to define some use cases that we could analyze that will give us the insights that we are looking for, become a building block for us to understand cost benefits and other ways forward for the megawatt charging. And these use cases, we wanted to align to particular trucking vocations. So we wanted to be able to include return to base operations, the multi-day operations, whether it's one night away or a cross US road trip, but therefore you're going to need some daytime and nighttime charging for that. And we also wanted to call out any sectors that we think might be particularly challenging. And one we've got here is owner operators, only because in our mind, owner operators are going to finish their day shift. They're going to want to charge up their trucks and then go home, go to bed and get up and then start their next day with a fully charged truck. That means that all these owner operators are really trying to get charged between 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night, hitting peak time, it seems to be an area that we probably want to just have a little bit closer look at the cost benefit side. We also wanted to get the operational requirements, whether it's a private facility like we've just talked about, or public or quasi-public, overnight charging, opportunity charging, location to a certain extent, whether it's close to port or close to owner-operator homes, or it's a freeway situation. And then part of this cost analysis, or at least the cost, we've got to understand what the charger utilizations are and what the times of use. So we're trying to understand, when do we think these trucks will be charging? And I think we were just talking a little bit about this, what is the actual time at a charging port for a cycle, because you're going to have what we've defined here as dwell time, but our idle time, where the truck's either got to get to the charger or from the charger, or else there's some dead time where the truck's present but the charger's not being used, which affects our overall utilization and the costs. And the reason why we want to present this today is we would really appreciate feedback on these use cases. Have we got the right use cases together? Is there anything else that we should be considering? And we could definitely do with some insights from you guys out there that are using the trucks or planning for the trucks, in terms of when do you think they're going to be charging. So the next slide, we go down. So this is the 5 use cases that we've started with. We wanted to keep to a generic, relatively small number of use cases that gave us coverage, just because we're going to start getting into the cost benefit analysis and then learn from that. But we're more than willing to take some feedback of adding cases or removing them. And then we've tried to split that up in terms of how we're characterizing these, between how they're being used, the operations. What does it mean in terms of capacity? Because we've got to figure somewhere here about how this scales as more and more trucks get deployed. And then that whole utilization topic that I was talking about before. So the 5 use cases, we've got 2 that are sort of depot-based cases. The second column maybe should start with this. Depot overnight. This is sort of low power CCS charging is a reference case for us, where the trucks are charged maybe over a 5-hour period when they're sat at the depot yards, and there's some managed charging going there. But we thought a reference case on CCS would be required. The other 4 cases here are megawatt charging. So we have a depot-based opportunity charge. Maybe the trucks are doing sort of up to 60 miles a day, coming back to the depot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. As soon as they come back, they can get quickly recharged, ready to go. So we have an opportunity depot charging. I mentioned the overnight charging. The next one is that owner-operator case that I described, where they're really wanting to charge after the shifts. I've suggested that's actually a 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. window here. Maybe it's a little bit early on the 5 p.m. But it's megawatt charging. The challenge is that it's a fairly short window. We get 3 trucks per charger, so we need lots of chargers for this. We're assuming it's an hour charge. And then, what does this mean as far as utilizations? And then we have 2 freeway or public style charging, well, sorry, 3-way style charging truck stop centers. One is for private fleets. Maybe the logistics fleets would have their own charging depots located close to the freeways. Maybe they're just warehouses that are there. And then the other one is the truck stop style, like TA, Travel Centers of America, or the other main truck stops. And again, we're assuming that the trucks will be stopping by. Maybe they're on their sort of intermediate rest break during their hours of service. Maybe it's an overnight charging that occurs when they're parked up on their mandatory rest periods. What does this mean? What are the utilizations? Is this all MCS charging or megawatt charging we've got here? Maybe truck stops, you need megawatt charging for that intermediate rest stop, but for the mandatory one, maybe it's CCS. So again, we're trying to understand what this may look like from the use cases. So I'm pausing because we would certainly appreciate feedback on this. We have a number of questions. I'll show some of those on the next slide here. So if you're thinking about that, but if you've got some comments, great to discuss them now, or please contact us afterwards. But we really want to make sure that as far as this ITAC advisory group goes, that we've got the right case studies we're looking at. If we move on, there's some questions here specifically for people. So, you know, have we got it right? Are there other use cases we might want to consider? You know, I've mentioned the sort of CCS megawatt charging. Do you think that that's something that's going to roll out? The bit that we're trying to figure out is really what are the peak times for charging. You know, for the depot guys, maybe that's a little bit easier, but, you know, what's the current practice with diesel trucks? Is there anything that we should be leveraging there? And how does the utilization of a diesel truck stop look like for a megawatt charging truck stop? And have we missed anything here? So Nate, if we can go back one slide, could just, I see there's one question out there.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So yeah, this is helpful to have this table up here. I mean, just as a knee-jerk reaction to, you know, how diesel truck stops work. I mean, it takes 15 to 20 minutes to fill up your tank, so they're churning that out pretty heavily. And, you know, I mean, I'm wondering, you know, kind of this owner operator centric model that you guys have come up with. And when we talk about vocations, I mean, obviously, you know, the term owner operator might not be the best way to describe them, those small fleets these days, and really the inability to do behind the fence depot charging for small fleets is really limited to their ability to enter into some type of agreement with a landlord where they don't own property already. So I'm just wondering if there's a need to break down within this quote unquote owner operator centric model actual vocations, right? Because you have drayage, you have aggregate, you have agriculture, you have possibly, you know, local delivery, and then also possibly even broken out by GVWR, because there's different needs. In drayage, for instance, the break between 5 and 6 p.m. is essentially the split between the two shifts, whereas in LA, Long Beach, and in Oakland, there's two shifts that happen. And if you need a top off, so to speak, that's when you would be topping off, because many small fleets work across both shifts. Either it's the kind of later half of the first shift and the first half to the second shift, or the majority of the first shift and then a small portion of the second shift as well. And I'm not sure that all charging is just going to be happening 6 to 9 p.m. And again, it really is broken down into further vocations might be helpful, because I don't know if you can paint with a broad brush, just based upon what, you know, the consideration of what an owner operator is. I mean, again, I don't know what you guys are considering an owner operator to be. Is that one person, one truck? Maybe you can answer that question.
In our minds, it started as one person, one truck, because they're the ones that have to charge before they go home. But you're right, it's not a lot different to a small fleet that would be there. So maybe it's small or micro fleet. And I think
I don't think everybody is just, you know, they need to charge before they go home, as in they're charging up their truck to then personal conveyance to their home. Yes, most definitely there is a component, a contingent of that size fleet in doing that back to home, literally driving their truck back to their house. But most are parked at a yard somewhere. It's on a dirt lot in the middle of Wilmington or something to that effect, where there isn't depot charging capability. So, if not necessarily maybe back to home, but wherever their garaging address is, so to speak. But I'm sorry I interrupted you there relative to kind of breaking down maybe into different vocations.
Yeah, so I think I like that suggestion. What I'm thinking we could do here, because we still want to keep our number of use cases down, is that we should probably take a larger list of vocations, like you mentioned, drayage, agriculture, small fleets, deliveries, and we could map how those vocations fit into the 5 use cases we've got. And if we've missed one, then it might be more obvious that we need to adjust one of the use cases or add it. So I kind of like that. I'm thinking that, the rows are different vocations, and we have 5 use cases along the top, and we just look at what that mapping is and make sure that we've got coverage.
Yeah, and GVWR I think is important too, because like you can have a single truck operator working for FedEx or for Amazon, for instance, and you could have a single truck small fleet working as a small fleet drayage operator. 2 very different use cases, obviously. So I think vehicle class is important potentially to look at as well, because that also indicates battery size a lot of times as well, when you're talking 400 to up to 700 kilowatt hour battery packs and class 8 350 and above. So that might be another layer to put in there, and also being mindful of the first ones up in the regulatory scheme of things are really the drayage fleets. So they're the ones with the most immediate need. And companies like Forum have been very proactive in getting in touch with some of these smaller fleet operators and trying to provide this pseudo depot, quasi public, whatever we want to call it, sort of, charging capability. Obviously, Edison's been very proactive, as is PG&E, but I think that
Hey, this is Adam Browning. I'd like to schedule a cleaning appointment. I also out my.
I thought he was going to say, "Hi, this is Adam
Out
Browning
loud.
from Forum Mobility, and we're happy to participate in this."
Yes.
So, just maybe slicing and dicing it a little bit more, just because it's too broad of a brush at this point, and that GVWR might help to kind of drill down, even regardless of fleet size. Because again, the single truck guys are kind of in the same boat as a 5 to 10 to possibly even 15 truck fleet as well.
So Matt, maybe this is my personal bias thinking here, but when we've looked at classes of trucks, the class 6 medium duties with smaller batteries, 150 kilowatt hours, don't seem like they're megawatt charging. So we've been particularly biased towards heavy duty.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a good reminder to us, saying that no, if we're looking at megawatt charging, we should also make sure we don't ignore the medium duty. I think that would be a strong feedback for us, because we kind of think that a medium duty truck you could charge within an hour on CCS.
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration, and just relative to the owner operator centric model, and to again slice that up a little bit further, because you have that depot overnight charging. Well, there are fleets that are engaged in all those vacations that we mentioned that have the capability to do depot overnight charging with lower capacity. So from a megawatt standpoint, you're trying to get in and out of there in an hour. That implies that you have public facing capability to do it. But again, even depending on the vocation, whether or not you're weight sensitive, et cetera, is going to kind of dictate how heavy your batteries are to start with. So just some thoughts there.
Okay, fantastic. Just
Hey, Matt, a follow-up question on your dirt lot picture that you painted there for where some of the trucks are charging in Wilmington. Are some of those dirt lots, I'm using the term, loosely, dirt lots that you're talking about, is there multiple owner operators using that, or is it kind of like just the owner operator, knew the guy who owned the gas station and it was behind the gas station? Or is it kind of a more informal thing, or is it a formal thing?
It runs the gamut.
Okay.
There's a company out there called Secure Space. They're owned by Envase and WiseTech, technology provider WiseTech. And more or less, it's like an app based where you can try to book parking for as little as 1 day up to a month. So they have access to many facilities, especially in and around port complexes or near port complex, near dock stuff.
Okay.
They might be able to give some insight, but it runs the gamut. It honestly does. You could be, and again, that term owner operator in California, because of AB5 and some other political issues, that isn't necessarily fully representative of what the fleet is these days. They're really more small fleets. So that is I think an idea to have in the back of your mind. I don't know if it's the nomenclature, the lexicon, or whatever we want to call it, that these are truly small fleets. And if you put a fleet size on it, ARB has varying fleet size definitions for small fleets, from 1 to 3 to 1 to 10 to 1 to 50, depending on what program you're looking at. But ideally, if you're trying to get after these kind of 1 to 10 truck operators, they're a lot of the times and the ones who are going to be potentially renting short term because they've been, their landlord has decided that there's some other use case for the particular dirt lot or whatever we want to call it, right? Is kind of a catch-all. So just, again, some food for thought. And there is opportunity out there for this public facing in some of those landlord driven facilities, quasi-public or otherwise. So again, just kind of slicing that up, I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, I don't know if you saw Paul's
Yeah,
question.
I was gonna say that. So the other comment we had is on TRUs. Like my comment about medium duty, we kind of had thought that TRUs would not need megawatt charging, but I don't know that we really thought a lot about TRU. I guess we could do a better definition of what we think those trucks are going to do, but it's going to be weird if they have to charge CCS and the main tractor charges MCS. That's not gonna go well, because you're going to have to find 2 charging points. So the TRU is quite an interesting point. I think we should definitely add that into our discussions. I don't know if anybody else has views on TRUs and how we should include them.
Yeah, this is Ted. I'm just going to raise my hand about multi-output chargers, where you might have dispensers that have multiple cables. And now with the J3400, you might have that same thing, like the unleaded diesel and ethanol. You'll have one island, but they'll have multiple connectors for different size vehicles.
Well, I'll just kind of add on, as Paul Black Beach, there are numerous efforts around the world to try to figure out these sorts of things. The coincidence on the same side of CCS and MCS, of course now NACS and TRUs. I think I was just sort of throwing it in to see who bid on it, is like, there needs to be work pointedly towards making sure CCS connectors are on the proper side of the truck. And I'm going to say proper, meaning right now they're landing on both sides of the truck, and that can be a big problem. There needs to be more thoughtful things about pull-through lanes and aisles that support, just as I'm describing, a centric towards one side. And then I am curious about, when you say megawatt, like, what do you all really mean here? Megawatt charging system will be able to support a range starting in the 100 kilowatt and then headed on up. It's a coupler that can do a lot of things. So I am kind of curious, what's your definition on those use cases?
Yeah, so we're using megawatt charging to talk about megawatt power levels independent of connector. Because
what is your definition of power levels for megawatt?
Sorry?
Where are you in your definition of, the time back to service? The megawatt starts,
yeah, so it's
3.75 megawatts. I'm just kind of curious which group you're thinking about. What does megawatt mean, especially if you have multiple ones at a site? What does it mean?
Yeah, so we're trying not to be linked to the MCS standard. So megawatt scale charging probably kicks in somewhere above where CCS can get to, so somewhere north of 500 kilowatts, and could go all the way up to 3 megawatts or 3.75 if you really want to do it. We're talking about that range of high power charging, where a heavy duty truck gets charged, within a 1 hour or less period. The CEC goals are sort of around 1.5, but we're trying not to get too wrapped up in the connectors and connector standards, because it gets confusing. There's MCS, there's pantograph, there's people talking about wireless out there. We're going to talk a little bit later about the Tesla standard. So we're talking about high power charging, megawatt scale charging, where we're up in 500 kilowatts plus.
And Paul, just to give you context of why we're not specific on the connector for this specific thing that Mark's talking about, is we're trying to do these use cases because we're going to be doing some economic analysis. This is going to inform our statewide planning. We're trying to figure out, is there scale economies, things that happen along the way. And so that's the purpose of this kind of thing. We are like, we do want to support, the technology work here too, but for this part of it, we're doing this more for the economic analysis stuff and the statewide planning activities.
Right. So just jumping back, you talked about TRUs a few minutes ago, and I don't see TRU on the sheet here. So
because it came from Paul, it was a question. Why haven't you got TRUs? So I've taken.
Okay, so same thing as me. It's like, it wasn't a should we? It's where should we?
Yeah. So a summary of what I've heard so far is that we need a larger list of vocations. We need to make small fleet, not owner operator. And in those vocations, we should also make sure that we've included medium duty for the GVWR comment and TRUs. And then we can run those vocations against the use cases to make sure that we've got the right sort of coverage.
I think that's really helpful. And what, as soon as you get to the TRU thing, it's then, are you dropping trailers? Do you have more trailers than you have trucks? Do you, bobtail in? Can you always pull through? It takes more acres, more land, of course, to do those things based on the use cases. So you might want to put some attention into, are you hooked up or not while charging?
Yep. Okay. Very good. I see there's another hand raised here from Philip.
Yeah, hi there, everybody. This is Phil Gibbons with the Port of San Diego. I think on the next slide, can you flip to the next slide real quick? I think you had some questions on there about use cases. And it sounds like the use cases you were considering was like a 200 to 300 mile scenario.
Only for one. That was just defining return to base.
Okay. Well, maybe my comment then is not necessary. I was just going to say, if we're looking at 200 to 300 mile, then I think you can cover some of the charging at lower rates. But so I would encourage you to look at a higher mile driving day, because that's what the megawatt charging will be appropriate for.
Exactly. The 200 to 300 was just trying to qualify for us for depot charging. Charging. For all the MCS ones, they're range independent as such.
Got it. Okay. Well, thanks.
Okay. So love the conversation. If there's other comments or if people want to have some follow-ups, please reach out. We're trying to understand this. You'll see this again once we get to the cost benefit side and do some of the analysis here. But we want this to be as thought-provoking and covering what we think the outlook looks like from the guidance of the ITAC here. Very good. We can move on. So another topic where we're looking to also get feedback, actually more specifically because we think this one may actually, or we would appreciate some more direct input where perhaps would appreciate a small working group, a subcommittee on this topic, because we're trying to define what are the research gaps that are required to develop the infrastructure side. I know we just talked a little bit about vehicles and what vehicles need to develop, and we've discussed in the past, battery system developments and the abilities of batteries to be able to accept megawatt scale charging without degradation. That's all a little bit outside of this scope, but here we're just looking at what do we need to do on the infrastructure side. And what we are looking at here is we're trying to figure out or look at what the current status is today for megawatt charging. It's very early, no vehicles yet deployed, but we're starting to do the planning. And then we're trying to map out what that future state's going to look like, maybe a sort of 2035, 2040 position of where we think megawatt scale charging would be. And then what is the research? What is the development that we need to do to be able to achieve that future state? And that may mean some changes or improvements, refinements to the EVSE designs and technology. There's some grid integration opportunities that need to happen, and also things that help to get to the operational improvements. Reservation systems not only give fleets confidence they can charge the vehicles, but we can actually get more predictable in what the charging load would be, which will ease the integration. So we're trying to put all this together, and again, as I said, we would really appreciate input, and we would like some volunteers from the ITAC here to maybe have a call in 2 weeks' time to go through what some of those research topics are. Our goal here is to get a draft list of research gaps and topics together for the middle of August. If we go on one slide, what we're thinking of in terms of where we are today, heading towards the future is, we're seeing this as a transition from CCS to MCS. There was a little bit of discussion about scale. We see initial deployments. What we heard from some of the surveys that we've done is that initially it's going to be maybe 1,000 amps at 1,000 volts, so a sort of 1 megawatt system. But we know, at least in Europe, there's plans for that to step up to 1,500 amps and 1,000 volts. And then we've heard, obviously, marine and other applications going higher power. There's some discussions from truck industry to go with higher voltages. So how do we do some future proofing? We've also got changes in probably the station size. Today it's a low voltage service up to sort of 3.3 megawatts is talked about. But if we're going to have a number of megawatt charging stations, we're probably going to move into around 9 to 12 megawatts. So that takes us into medium voltage connections. And then, I'm sure we'll need efficiency improvements, uptime improvements, cost optimizations, and then that whole, how do we get to be have reservation systems? How do we become more predictable in our load? How do we deploy energy storage and solar and other power sources to be able to complement the capabilities? And maybe we need to move from one directional to bi-directional. So we're trying to really understand what that future state would be. And if we move on one slide, what we've got is an initial list that we've put together for the areas of focus and the research topics. I wasn't planning on going through these today, but they're there for the materials to look at. This is where our thinking is. And again, this is where we really would like a subcommittee to further this discussion. So if you're able to support us in this, if you could drop your email in the chat saying that you'd like to take part, we would really appreciate it. And I said we'd look to set up a discussion here in probably 2 weeks' time, so that we can stay on track for getting an initial draft together for middle of August. And if you're trying to digest the table, we're looking at things that are going to have improvements around site designs, about the feature sets, efficiency of the of EVSE. Efficiency becomes much more important now because a 1% improvement in overall efficiency has quite a significant cost advantage or cost saving advantage. Connectors, that's the whole discussion we were on with the MCS connector and the other types out there. The other thing that we want to be recognized here is that in the same time frame, 2035, 2040, we're probably going to see autonomous trucks, at least in highway applications. So again, what is our consistency with being able to support autonomous trucking? And is that a cable connector with some robotics, or is it some other type of charger? Again, at least what do we need to be working on to be able to future-proof for that? And then the grid integration challenge is obviously a concern from a utility standpoint. If you've got random switching on of megawatt loads, can we make that more predictable? From historical load profiles, reservation systems. Do those reservation systems need to integrate with fleet management scheduling in the same way that that's done for deliveries? What else do we need to do in this area? So again, a number of things here. Reliability is on the list in terms of remote monitoring, maybe some sort of self-healing with the opportunity to restore on systems. How do we get to those very high uptimes? That saves us not having to have multiple spare megawatt charging systems available. So hopefully I've sold that as something that's exciting and interesting and people will like to volunteer to. So thanks. Hey, thanks, Paul. That's great. And if others are interested, please let us know. We would love to have that discussion. Watson, Ken, did you want to add anything to this?
No, that's a good summary. Again, we might be reaching out to some of you just to get some feedback, and if it's a one-time thing, that'd be great. Just again, we're trying to identify some of the research that industry thinks needs to be done, and we're trying to provide a framework to give that feedback. So appreciate that. If there's no more questions in this area, I did want to, and Mark, did you have anything remaining questions for this? Or?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. I did want to introduce John Hollowell from EPRI, and the next agenda topic we had was a discussion of the NACS, and I know Ted's on the call here too, but John, we gave you a couple minutes here to 10 minutes or so to talk about the NACS activities and updates, and just because it's a topic that we're trying to understand, does it impact trucking or not? And it's clear it has an impact on the passenger vehicles, but in the truck market, I think a lot of people are trying to understand that impact, and so I'd like to introduce John Hollowell from EPRI, and John, go ahead and take yourself off mute and
Yeah.
Welcome.
All right, just make sure, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So the NACS, if you live under a rock, you might not have heard of this, but the bottom line is back in late 2022, Tesla published out a lot of materials that relate to their charging proprietary interface. They titled it the North American Charging Standard when they published the documents out, although it's not been through any standards organization at this point. Tesla released that design around November timeframe. It included documentation for both 500 volt and 1000 volt variations of their connector. There was a bit of confusion from that. They included some data sheets for 500 volt parts, and they included drawings for 1000 volt parts, and it really wasn't clear exactly what they were releasing. I think the 500 volt parts also carried a 200 amp current limit. So it didn't seem very interesting. I kind of looked at it. I think many of us did, and kind of set that on the shelf. Turn back time to around May of this year, and Ford made their announcement that they were going to move to using the Tesla coupler, followed by, half a dozen other automakers, including Nissan, apparently announced today. So that got everybody's attention. I think then we started looking, okay, maybe we better go back and look at the documents they released and see what's up. In the interim, this SAE International has gotten involved. They're trying to fast track moving the Tesla coupler into a standard. They have stood up a working group or a task force. It's SAE J3400, J3400. The title of that group right now is the North American Charging System. We made the S into system since it's not a standard yet, but NACS is the acronym I think they're going to stick with for now. The two variations I mentioned is 500 volt and 1000 volt couplers. Really the only difference when you look at the drawings is the 1000 volt coupler. They've removed more of the insulating material around the pins. The reason for that is the pins have sufficient spacing to handle 1000 volts, but there are also UL requirements around what they call tracking or creepage. That is current flow that it can occur along the insulating material between pins. And so they had to make sure that distance was increased. And to do that, they just removed some plastic material. Because of that, the connectors are interchangeable. That is a 500 volt connector can go into an inlet, and a 1000 volt connector can plug into a 500 volt inlet. So they're can go back and forth. Obviously, you can't put 1000 volts on a 500 volt part. So that's one limitation. You can imagine that vehicles might use the 500 volt part if they only have a 400 volt nominal battery system. They wouldn't need the 1000 volt part, but I would imagine that all infrastructure you would want to use the 1000 volt part because you need to support both current vehicles and future vehicles that might go to 800 volt bus. I guess some of the key comments. One is that this is not releasing Tesla's proprietary back office or how they do things at a supercharger. They've made clear they're looking to sort of align with industry. This is all about the mechanical interface. So what I would call the coupler, the inlet and the connector, the pin design, so that those two would mate together. It does not include how you terminate the wires on the inlet side to those pins, or how you terminate the wires on the connector side from the infrastructure to the pins in the coupler. So it's strictly the interface, very much like is done in SAE J1772 for the CCS coupler. How wires are terminated is not a part of that standard. So it makes sure that different manufacturers' parts can connect together. There are some limitations on the dimensions of the inlet and the connector on the infrastructure. So you can't make the handle, gigantic to terminate your wires. You have to stay within a volume that's defined in the drawings. What that means is things like the cooling capability on the connector is not a part of this. So people were concerned. Tesla has provided paperwork. I have not seen it, but they have provided paperwork to SAE indicating that they are not going to exercise any IP rights. That is, the document will be able to be published A3400 free of requirements for royalties, at least from Tesla, and they're requiring members of the committee to make their disclosures. So if anyone is going to make patent or IP claims toward this coupler, those will be disclosed here in the near future. So I guess the key thing that came out in the conversations with Tesla in SAE, they really aren't looking to put a maximum current limit on this coupler. It comes down to what you can do with your design. I think we've sort of seen that with CCS couplers that initially, 400 amps was stated in the standard. That has crept up, and I'd heard numbers of 800 amps that people had tested amp. Tesla mentioned that they have run their coupler at continuous current of 900 amps on one of the calls I attended. If you assume that was at a nominal 800 volts for a vehicle, that would be 720 kilowatts. I guess you could call it almost a megawatt coupler, 900 amps at 1000 volts. You're up to 900 kilowatts. But that requires really good engineering design on the coupler side, on the coupler in order to get the heat out of the wires and the pins. And again, that's not part of what was released. So it's still left to people to develop their own couplers that have their wire interfaces and whatever capabilities they can meet for current. I think those are the key takeaways to me. I guess the other one, and I didn't talk much about the supercharger. That's really not what this is about. Again, this is about a standardized coupler. So it's, in a sense, we're going to use all of the protocols and the behaviors that are associated with the existing CCS coupler, but we're going to just have a physically different connector and inlet. So connector inlet change, you still follow the pilot wire operation using the PWM. We will need to make a little bit of a tweak because the CCS coupler has a push button latch mechanism. The Tesla coupler does not have a latch mechanism. It does have a locking mechanism, and they repurposed their switch on their coupler slightly different from what's done in J1772. But again, Tesla has said they want to move toward the standards, not away. Not on the table is their CAN bus interface or how superchargers function. When it comes to the announcements from Ford or GM or all the different car companies that have said they're going to be on the Tesla network, how they're going to interact with that network, how they're going to identify vehicles, how they're going to do plug and charge, that's kind of left to what they put in their contracts. And I see Ted, you got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add on the slide from Charan. So if you're done, when you're done, I just wanted to add on the Charan parallel activity. I think is significant.
Yeah. Go ahead and comment on it. I was on the call. I don't know. It's kind of like SAE is working toward writing a standard. Charan's got an active group that's looking at it. Yeah, go for it, Ted.
Yeah. So Watson, can you let me share or promote me?
We're working on it. 1 second.
And this slide is about the work groups, just to show you how there's parallel activities. Okay, so I am on screen 3. Share. Okay. I think I'm sharing. Can you see the grid thing?
An email. Yeah.
Yeah,
it was just
a screenshot while we were typing. I just grabbed a screenshot of what groups they are. So we pick group leaders, and so the Charan alignment group says we will help the SDOs. And so there were 180 people on that call from global. So on the J3400, which is actually a work group, where we neck down the scope to get the information reference out this year. So the goal is to have the first version of the SAE document published this year. The Charan group is different. They say divide and conquer. Let's do this market alignment stuff. And so I don't have a slide of which groups. I volunteered to be a co-lead on the charging topology and grid technology. And then you can see there's white space here. So during the meeting, we typed in more topics about metrology and safety and other things. So anyway, these are the work groups within the Charan group. They're going to have bi-weekly meetings. They're going to create a white paper. And then from that, these groups will help pull apart, and Paul was there too, on who's doing what and how we were working together as a team. There is replication, right? So that's the downside. But on the other hand, if there's things that are out of scope for J3400, this group can work on that in parallel, because again, the whole idea for 3400 is to get the document out this year. You really have to refine what's in and out of scope. And so, for instance, adapters are out of scope. Bidirectional is out of scope for the first pass, just to get it out this year, and then have the second iteration of the information reference and then a recommended practice, hand wavy sometime next year. So those are the inputs I just wanted to share with this. Any questions about the groups and activities within Charan?
So Ted and John, is this going to carry over to the truck industry, do you see, or is CCS going to be the low power connector for the trucks and MCS, or how do you see this playing out in the trucking industry?
I see it being an and. So if the shoe fits, people will use it. And if you have a multiple output dispenser that has CCS, MCS, and J3400 NACS, you're going to see products like that.
Okay.
So the uptake, again, because it can reach 1,000 volts, that's the key enabler. Go ahead, John.
I just say it's another tool in the toolbox. So
it's another tool. It's another style of shoes. You want to wear those shoes, you wear those shoes, but they're not too small.
It's certainly muddied the waters.
Right. And you're going to try to get motorcycle people pull into a semi spot, right? You're going to have both sides of the vehicle say that connector's for me. There's going to be that kind of battle. right, which is what we have for CCS now, right? There are motorcycles that pull into big CCS spots and take up the whole spot. And some people was like, what the hell? Right. And they say, if it fits in my plug, that spot's for me. Anyway, I can
Very good. Oh, this is,
stop sharing if I can.
I've got a hard stop at the half
yeah,
hour.
good discussion. Yeah. And
Go.
I just wanted to, Nate, if you want to take it back to our slides here, appreciate the audible on that and, you know, just introducing the NACS stuff.
And the timeline, just to be aware that there's a whole bunch of pressure to get the first draft out this year.
Okay, perfect. So on this slide, you know, just to wrap this up, Nate, were you gonna cover this or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure, I'll cover it. So next steps for ITAC members are to email additional feedback on what Ken was talking about with the Advanced Transportation Research Center. You can email that to his email here, kenlim@epri.com. And then any additional feedback on the BEV truck charging use case considerations that Mark Wiseman reviewed, email that to him here at mark@oberoninsights.com. And we're also conducting, just to be clear, further outreach with our stakeholder group members outside of this meeting too. So we'll make sure we loop everyone in here to what's being determined there, and then keep an eye out for subcommittee meetings where we discuss these topics further. And specifically, if you're interested in joining the subcommittee that Mark Wiseman was discussing for use cases and all that, and you can let me know at my email here, nfernandez@calstart.org. Anything else, general ITAC questions or project questions, you can also email to me. And lastly, keep an eye out for the meeting summary follow-up email and the recording to be sent out. Next slide. And feel free to take a screenshot of this too. It has all of our contact info. We'll leave that up there for a second. I know we're at time. And the last item on the next slide is just thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to have these conversations with us. It's super valuable for the project, for all that we're doing here on such an important project. Anything else you wanted to say, Watson, before we close it out?
Oh, thanks, everybody. And for our next meeting, I think is in September, is it, Nate?
Should be October.
Or October, excuse me. You know, if there's any topics that you want covered, you know, also email any of us and we'll make sure that we address those things. So please forward us any agenda topics you'd like to hear from the project. Thanks. And appreciate everybody's time. Have a good day.